welcome to Dialogue. I'm Wang Mengmang in Beijing. On May 20th, the head of the Democratic Progressive Party, Ing-wen, will take office as the new leader of Taiwan. Throughout her winning campaign, she vowed to maintain the status quo in relations between Taiwan and the mainland, but was also careful to remain ambiguous about what exactly that means. Now, with Beijing pushing for a more explicit reaffirmation of the 1992 consensus, what will be the response? Is ambiguity a necessary part of current cross-strait relations? And how will this issue affect the climate in which Tsai sets about dealing with serious challenges on the island? To discuss all these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by author and columnist Ing-wen and current affairs commentator Victor Gao. And we'll also cross live to former Taiwan legislator Joanna Lei via satellite. But before we begin our discussion, let's take a look at this.
With May 20th fast approaching, Tsai Ing-wen from the Democratic People's Progressive Party of Taiwan will soon be inaugurated. Tsai has pledged she will maintain the status quo in cross-strait relations, while Beijing demands that she accept the core of the 1992 consensus, which is that the two sides of the Taiwan Strait belong to one and the same China.
The two sides could communicate positively and constantly push forward the cross-strait ties if Taiwan acknowledges the historical facts of the 1992 consensus and agrees with its core connotations. Our demand is reasonable.
Earlier in April, several telecom fraud cases put pressure on the sensitive relationship. On April 16th, Taiwan released 20 telecom fraud suspects deported by Malaysia, citing a lack of evidence, and differences between the two legal systems added fuel to the fire. On April 18, a Taiwan delegation was asked to leave a high-level meeting at an international steel symposium held by the OECD Steel Committee and the Belgian government. The delegation issued a protest to both the OECD and Beijing. Late last month, the U.S. Foreign Affairs Committee of the House of Representatives passed a bipartisan measure to reaffirm the 6 assurances to Taiwan. The guidelines were put forward by former U.S. President Ronald Reagan with the purpose of consolidating U.S. support to the island.
Well, Tsai Ing-wen will be taking office on May 20th, and now we're going to discuss what her policies will be and what that'll mean for cross-strait relations. And for that, let's turn to our studio guest, Victor Gao and Ing-wen. It's great to have you with us, and also Joanna Lei from Taiwan. So we understand that cross-strait relations have been experiencing lots of ups and downs, and now they are undergoing a new test. The newly elected leader, Tsai Ing-wen, has emphasized her adherence to the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. However, the status quo is a very ambiguous idea. So what exactly does that mean? Does the mainland also prefer ambiguity, and how much ambiguity is acceptable or desirable in this equation?
Well, it's only 7 days before Ms. Tsai Ing-wen will be inaugurated as the leader of Taiwan, and I think Taiwan itself is at a major crossroad. Under Tsai Ing-wen, Taiwan may take steps towards strengthening relations with mainland China, which is its largest trading partner, or, on the other hand, Taiwan may also take steps which may actually put us to the rapprochement, if I may use that word, between the two sides of the Taiwan Strait and push Taiwan into a direction which may eventually generate Great Mainland or even conflict. So I think Taiwan need to really exercise her leadership and wisdom and annul the burden on her shoulder and choose a better path forward which will bring benefit to the people in Taiwan as well as here in mainland, so that we will have greater peace and greater sense of order, rather than, look forward into a future full of uncertainty or even disaster for people on both sides of the Taiwan Strait.
Well, clearly there are different interpretations of the status quo. So, Mr. Ing-wen, do you think that the status quo mean the same thing to the mainland and Taiwan?
Well, if you're talking about people, I think if you actually ask people in Taiwan what it meant, they've done some surveys. People are very, very ambiguous about it. They're not quite certain what it means. Obviously, there have been many changes since the 80s in Taiwan, especially about this notion of being Chinese. Today, more and more people call themselves Taiwanese, not Chinese, whereas in the 80s, the majority said, look, I'm Chinese, I'm not Taiwanese, I'm not from here, we came here. So this is a very different type of thing. Now, what she has done is politically, she was pandering to the Green Party basis, is this idea that there will never be a unified Taiwan and mainland. All right? But they can't come out and say that economically. But what has been missing here is her economic strategy. There's just no indication whatsoever that she has any details about how this is going to go. And when you start looking at the relationship between Taiwan and the mainland across straits, it's very important. 40% of exports, 20% of imports, 10% of the entire working population works in China. All right, if this were to be endangered, it would have an absolutely crippling effect on Taiwan. So the question is, what is she trying to accomplish by playing the political ends, and will that actually work out economically? I don't think so.
Right, so she clearly lacks economic policies to cheer Taiwan up. Well, while Tsai is repeatedly pledging to maintain the status quo with the mainland, she hasn't made it clear how she was going to approach the 1992 consensus, which laid the framework for the steady development of cross-strait relations. Do you think that she's going to refer to the 1992 consensus in her inauguration speech on May 20th?
I hope she will, but it's not certain that she will do that. If we look at her track record, it's alarming because she has been a champion for Taiwan independence, and she has not shied away with taking positions on this very, very divisive issue between mainland China and Taiwan. On the other hand, I hope she has also sobered us, especially after she has won the election. She has several months to weigh all the options, politically, for example, what should be the status of Taiwan, but also economically, what will really bring real benefits for the people in Taiwan. So after all, I hope in the next 7 days or so, she will think through very carefully, and she will come up with her own option and decision. And I hope she will stand firm on one thing, that is, there is only one China, and you cannot get away from that.
I think Victor's being very hopeful. The truth is, she's going to stick to her ambiguity. She'll just say the status quo, and I'm certain that she will mention status quo a number of times during her speech, and just, as you say, continuing the ambiguity of exactly where she stands on these issues. I mean, you have to look a little bit at her background. She was actually one of the drafters of the statement that said that there's two countries, Taiwan and mainland. And this was very upsetting. Chen Shui-bian, who was later disgraced and things like that, but she was actually there. She went from being a lawyer right into academia, all right, and then into politics. She never really had any business experience. She ran a medical lab after she left government, but it was a very, very short period of time, and I think it was there for political influence as opposed to any kind of ability or experience in that particular field. So she lacks this kind of business background, and I think this is going to continue to be a weak point. She hasn't really indicated who she's going to bring in for the economic side of this thing, but this is a country, she was voted in by young voters who said, we're unemployed and the future does not look good, and we're looking for something new, and can she deliver it?
So you've already identified some of the challenges that's already facing Tsai, and now let's get some Taiwan perspective. Joanna, I'd like insight on this. Beijing has repeatedly emphasized the adherence to the 1992 consensus, and that pressure is increasing as May 20th approaches her inauguration day. So do you think that Tsai is likely to refer to that consensus in her speech, and what is the atmosphere like there?
Well, this item and this particular topic has been the headline news for almost every news every day. But to this date, Tsai Ing-wen has sent out numerous test balloons via her previous mentors, Hu Shengzheng, Xie Changting, and even Li Denghui. All of them indicated one thing, that unless there are extraordinary events or due to circumstances totally beyond her control, otherwise he would not or should not be mentioning 92 consensus. And even yesterday, Li Denghui and her other mentors came out strongly advised her not to mention and not to even acknowledge the 92 consensus. So if you take a look and take a poll in terms of whether she will be mentioning this, most people believe that she'll try to mention something in the neighborhood or in the woods about this. She has tried to use 92 events, 92 meetings, 92 documents, but all of which did not mention the true nature of what it defines in terms of the One China policy from mainland side and One China virtuous respective interpretation from the Taiwan side. So Tsai Ing-wen has tried to use all kinds of measures or all kinds of rhetoric to avoid mentioning status quo. And may I just add, status quo is a dynamic idea. Most of the people do not realize that the status quo today, which is peace and co-development across the Taiwan Straits, is not our norm over the last 60 or 70 years. It is a very hard-earned future made by politicians across the Taiwan Straits and try to make people in a more developmental friendly approach to address our historical issues. So when Tsai Ing-wen continue to iterate status quo, she will have to pay tribute to what status quo is today, and probably she tries to define what status quo is by using different rhetoric, probably in the May 20th speech.
She's really being very careful about the choice of words. And at the same time, Joanna, a lot of people say that probably Tsai will become the first elected Taiwan leader that will have no initial honeymoon period. She's already confronted with lots of challenges, under lots of pressure. So what do you think are her main challenges? Our student guest here identified her inability to steer the economic wheel. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, certainly when she steps into the leadership position, she'll be facing at least three major challenges. One is regional stability and peace are now being challenged, including some events that Taiwan is a part of, including the Taiping Island, including Diaoyutai, and including the recent island disputes with Japan. Secondly, economic downturn will be her main challenge when she steps into her position as the leader of Taiwan, because we are not only experiencing a slowdown in GDP, we're experiencing a huge slowdown in export. As a very small island economy, it is not self-sustainable. So export is a very major event and very major challenge for Tsai Ing-wen. Thirdly, and not least important, is that she will have a runaway Congress. Most of the rookie politicians who are newly elected into the Congress have introduced bills or tried to change the national budget in ways above and beyond people's expectation. And this runaway Congress sometimes seemingly is working incongruent with Tsai Ing-wen's basic approach, but other time may introduce turbulence to both cross-strait relations and Taiwan's local development.
Right, and now let's make this connection between cross-strait relations and Taiwan's economy. To some extent, they're intertwined, and we know that economic and trade ties became stable during Ma Ying-jeou's term in office, and Tsai Ing-wen has vowed that things will not go backwards when she takes office. Do you think that she'll be able to deliver this promise without a solid trust relationship with the mainland?
I don't think she can, actually. I think Beijing is going to be looking for assurances, especially on the 92 agreement. And it's going to be very, very difficult to kind of climb out of this. She's trying to play this line where she's catering to the political side of why she was elected, but trying to also do the economic. And I don't think she can do that easily. She obviously was criticizing the previous government and Ma Ying-jeou about all the things that they were doing, but what is the substitute? And this is really what everyone's asking. What is her strategy? How is she going to move this country forward during very, very difficult times? As Joanna said, this is not just about the economics. There's also, as I say, a lot of political intrigue that are going on with a lot of new faces in there. And they're going to be demanding things. It's the rough and ready of democratic politics is very, very difficult. And she's going to have to be able to really crack down on these people. She's never done that in the past, so it's going to be a challenge.
Right, Victor Gao, your side on this?
Well, as I just mentioned, we are only about a week before her inauguration, and I still want to give her the benefit of doubt. I still hope she will really come to the level of courage and vision and wisdom about how to better handle the cross-strait relations. And she needs to do a couple of things. One is to firmly put the national interest of the people in Taiwan to the forefront. She cannot afford to do anything which will eventually damage the economic interests of the people in Taiwan. And in this sense, she has only one choice, and that's the right choice. That is to further improve the cross-strait relations and stand firm eventually, even though, principally speaking, she would not want to do that, but she has to do that as the leader. That is, there is only one China. Now, how she will phrase that, that's a matter of tactics. But if she does not fully stand firm on this one China policy, then economics will go down the drain. And the worst, which will be a disaster for both Taiwan and China, mainland China, may happen. That is, the civil war has never come to an official end, and maybe it will flare up again. It will be a disaster for people on both sides of the Taiwan Strait.
There certainly will be consequences.
Yeah, so I hope Taiwan will come up to a sufficient level of wisdom, vision, and courage to make the right decision, not only for the people in Taiwan, but also for all the people on both sides of the Taiwan Strait. And if she does that, then Taiwan's tomorrow will be better than it is today, and mainland China and Taiwan will deal with each other with dignity, and the cross-strait relations can be improved, and both sides will benefit. That's the win-win situation. Otherwise, we will see great uncertainty. Conflicts may flare up across the strait, and then people in Taiwan, as well as here in mainland China, may suffer for the wrong decision that she may do on May the 20th, as well as in the days and weeks and months beyond that.
And she'll have to make some really tough choices. We're going to take a short break now, gentlemen and Joanna, and we'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Dialogue, and now we're going to continue our debate here about what Tsai Ing-wen will do to Taiwan, to cross-strait relations. Victor Gao just mentioned some serious consequences. He was predicting consequences, and obviously Einar Tangen is having a different view on this.
Well, I think I'd like to add some nuances to this. I mean, there are different levels. If she continues with this ambiguity, all right, I think it could seriously impede economic progress. And the, quote, status quo will not be the status quo that's been achieved over the last 8 years. But the only way that there's going to be any saber rattling going on here is if she were to positively take steps to declare the independence of Taiwan or something like this. That would be, yes, very, very serious. But I think you have to draw a line between continuing ambiguity and economic consequences versus any kind of real military action, which I think, quite frankly, is not even in the cards.
And Joanna, what do you think about these gentlemen's discussions? Some say that Tsai Ing-wen is unlikely to reject the 1992 consensus openly, but she's going to keep her pro-independence stance by adopting policies that, by quietly adopting policy that goes against it.
Well, certainly that is the historical record of both Chen Shui-bian and Tsai Ing-wen per se, because they have successfully adopted a salami tactic, gradually making their ideology and political ideas known to the world, and gradually gaining acceptance even from the opposite end. So I do believe that Tsai Ing-wen will not come out abruptly making any declaration. However, if you take a look at her May 20th event, that major celebration has a lot of elements. If it's not a declaration of independence, it's definitely a declaration of coming of age. It is a new and very self-confident DPP saying that we have gained power and we are coming of age. We have stepped up to the leadership position and we will take the island to a new direction. The country will take a different turn, and under the new leadership of Tsai Ing-wen, there will be things quite different from what Ma Ying-jeou has done.
Now, how are people in Taiwan interpreting the signs about Tsai Ing-wen's policies? How are they expecting this inauguration speech?
Well, Actually, most people have no idea what Tsai Ing-wen's policy will be, especially with respect to economic. Remembering that her entire campaign has played in one theme, which is ambiguity. He has not made clear in terms of how to maintain status quo, nor has she made clear how her 2020 nuclear-free and coal-free economy can be achieved. So most people are now giving her benefit of the doubt and said maybe on May 20th, she'll finally declare what she plans to do in the next 4 years, what her major plans are, and what are the approaches taking the entire island and the economic necessity into the next phase. Most people actually have no idea and will have to await until the May 20th inaugural speech to better understand what Tsai Ing-wen really tries to do.
So you've all agreed that the economy is the biggest challenge facing Tsai Ing-wen. Now let's get a clear picture of Taiwan's economy. Even though you mentioned that the GDP is still growing, there are figures showing that this year's GDP is unlikely to reach 1% and it could fall into negative territory. So what does that tell us? What are the risks facing Taiwan's economy? It seems that it's diminishing competitiveness.
Well, one of the things that you can't hide, no matter what the numbers are growing, the fact is that it's being squeezed on margins. The profitability of the businesses which they once pioneered, especially in electronics, have been getting thinner and thinner. They've lost the low end to China and other places where they're developing new technologies, and they're very, very pushed on the high end where you have South Korea, the United States, and other groups who are also competing for that. And this is during an economic slowdown. So everything is being pushed down, and this means that there's just not as much profits, and this is impacting it. Also, there's been this move, you cannot go be competitive by producing in Taiwan, and that's why Foxconn and everyone's moving to India, to China, wherever they're going, it's always for cheap labor. And this is impacting it because although the companies might be doing well, it is not bringing money back to Taiwan, and this is where a lot of young people feel kind of they're not feeling very good about it. They don't see a bright future or prospects ahead of them. Unfortunately, there are prospects for many of them actually in China.
But they've been complaining about job opportunities and low starting wages for graduates.
Yeah, but 10% of them have made the move to China and are actively working. 10% of the entire workforce. So it's probable that more will come, but it is very dependent on good economic relations.
Right, and so this increasing dependence, Taiwan's economy on the mainland, what does that mean to cross-strait relations?
Yeah.
Is that something that Taiwan could possibly shake off?
Now, I think we can look at the economy in Taiwan in two different ways. One is on the macro level, the other on the micro level. On the macro level, I would say now that China and South Korea have signed the free trade agreement, China, South Korea, and Japan are talking about a tripartite trade agreement. China and Canada, for example, are talking about a free trade agreement. China, Australia, and China, New Zealand, China, ASEAN. We are all signed
so
up
many
for
bilateral
the trade.
and regional.
Therefore, Taiwan need to make a decision, and Taiwan need to really beef up its commitment so that Taiwan is really a party to all this ever-changing landscape in terms of how trade will be structured and done. That's on the macro level. On the micro level, I would say, Taiwan being as it is, with only 23 million people as its population, whatever Taiwan wants to thrive on cannot be done just for the local population. And if they look beyond the boundary of Taiwan, then anyone need to come to the right logical conclusion that mainland China, with 1.37 billion people, is the largest natural and logical market for Taiwan, not only for exports, but also for manufacturing, as well as many other exchanges in the economic sector. Therefore, I truly believe that Tsai Ing-wen will not be able to disregard the importance of the cross-strait economic relations, because if she does disregard that, that will spell the doom economic prospect in Taiwan. Therefore, I truly hope and urge Tsai Ing-wen to make the right decision. Now, on the other hand, I would say Taiwan is transforming. I was in Taipei just a couple of months ago, and I could see for myself that the people in Taiwan cannot be complacent. They really need to move higher and higher on the competitive edge. They cannot afford to lag behind, other major producers or manufacturers, either here in mainland China or in South Korea and in ASEAN countries. Therefore, I think the challenge is real for Taiwan, and at this particular moment, if they do the wrong thing politically, which may eventually take away the potential for the mainland market to be engaged with Taiwan, then disaster in the economic sector will happen to Taiwan, and then Tsai Ing-wen will be held responsible for the major correction and decline in the economic development in Taiwan. I hope this will not be the case.
Economic circumstances are changing, and it seems that people's mentality has also changed. For example, Ina mentioned just now that a lot of the older generation who started their own companies in the 1960s, they turned these companies into some of the top companies that. However, at the same time, that they are trying to keep the younger generation safe by telling them to avoid risks. So why are they losing confidence?
Well, it's part of the middle income trap, except they got above it. But this issue is wealth preservation versus making wealth. They had no choice. Taiwan is, as Victor pointed out, a trade nation. Without it, they're sunk. They have very low resources per person. They're very dependent on imports coming in, everything from food to oils and energy and things like this. So it's very important that they chart a very clear future. Otherwise, they risk being like Japan, kind of mired in this sideways downward pressure as the population ages and things like this. So yes, there is a change in mentality. It is affecting them. And the question is, how are they going to get over this? They're coming to a crisis point, I would agree. And I think over this next 4 years, you're not going to see the same kind of economic progress that you saw during the last 8. And this will further compound it. But this is a democracy. And as Victor pointed out, when they go to the polls in 4 years from now, they will, if she has not been able to deliver, the only thing you know for certain is she will not remain.
And it takes the next 4 years to show his political will and, of course, wisdom. So a lot more to be discussed on the inauguration day, May 20th. And gentlemen and Joanna will be getting back to you then. And thank you so much for your thoughtful discussion on this. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of Dialogue. I'm Wang Mengmang. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.